Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Bruno, for putting this conference together. It is really timely. I test. I tested. Can you see me? I lost some of the image.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I tested positive for COVID a couple of weeks ago, so I'm doing this from home. If you happen to listen a small voice behind me, that's not a technical problem. It's the younger generation wondering who's going to pay for the fiscal stimulus. As I said, this couldn't be more timely, and there are very important distinctions that we have to do. As the pandemic unfolds first from China, then to advanced economies, most of the lessons that we draw from that early experience were coming from advanced economies. But the effects of the pandemic, the lockdown, and the capital flows are different and asymmetric depending on different classes of economies. And for us, we see at least three different kinds of effects. One, the ones that advanced economies are facing. Second, the ones that middle income economies we are facing. And in that sense, we have a special case in Argentina, and I join both Mohammed and Cristalina in wishing a sensible and quick agreement between Argentina and their creditors. And the third case is those of the low-income economies, the high economies. And we are very pleased to see the commitment to find a solution for this set of countries, in particular the commitment of G20 with Africa countries. Middle-income economies have a different kind of challenge. On the one hand, we are less subject to some of the traditional shocks, but still capital flows are creating a dent on our degrees of maneuver. Let me just share with you a couple of numbers. As opposed to, let's say, the 80s or the 90s, most of the debt in Mexico now is denominated in peso and is in long term. But still something around between 25 and 30% of our debt is denominated in currency. As the pandemic started hitting, there was a new sense of uncertainty in the world, and this was followed by a flight to quality and outflows from developing countries to safe havens. That create in early March a devaluation of the peso from around 19 pesos per dollar to 25 pesos per dollar. That was even before the lockdown. That increased notionally the debt at that point, but almost 7% of GDP. So even before Mexico started thinking about the fiscal stimulus, our debt was increasing valuation at a time on 7% of GDP, limiting very strongly our ability to face the pandemic. Now, what we think we need to do in this set of countries? One thing that we learned is that we have to recalibrate the timeline that we were facing. In February, when we met in the G20, we thought at the time that it was a matter of closing the economies, of locking down the economies for 2 to 3 months. Now what we know is that we need to close we indeed were closing the economies for 2 or 3 months, but the recovery is going to be much more slower than we thought. The timing of the recovery is conditioned on the timing of the pandemic itself, and we won't be able to have a full recovery until a cure or a proper medicine is found. That means that we middle-income countries need to have some power drive, because this is gonna last at least 1 more year or to a year and a half. It's not about just providing support for the economy right now, but providing support for the economy for the next couple of years. Finally, I want to mention made a couple of comments. As we have been worried and focused on these issues, which we could assume there are some sort of external shocks, idiosyncratic challenge have gone to the background, and those problems need to be addressed at some point, because the pandemic has created a reduction of the fiscal space and the ability to respond to them. For Mexico, these are the traditional problems: a lack of growth, inequality, and probably some of the underlying reasons, lack of investment and the lack of proper on revenues. Let me make a reflection about that, paraphrasing what Gita Jopinath mentioned a couple of days ago. She said it was not the time to start doing fiscal consolidation, but it was the time to start planning for fiscal consolidation in the future. It is not a time to start addressing the idiosyncratic challenges that each country had, but it's a time to start planning for them. Down the road, we will need to do something about it. Thank you, Mohammed.